What if I told you a perfectly tied pair of custom running shoes could be the last trace of a teenage boy who simply vanished? For over a decade, an entire town mourned a ghost, unaware the answer was hiding in plain sight. Immortalized forever on the silver screen, a clue waited to be discovered. Did you know your body's biomechanics, how you walk and run, are as unique as your fingerprints? You can change your name, your city, build a new life, but not easily change your foot strike. By the end, you'll learn how a blurry 2-second clip cracked a 12-year-old cold case. You'll discover gait analysis secrets, the dark psychology of coercive control, and how to spot a predator. We're breaking down one of the most chilling disappearances, step by step, through agonizing frustration, quiet desperation, and an explosive cinematic breakthrough. Each detail builds on the last, changing how you look at the people you trust. The real story of who orchestrated this vanishing and why will shake you to your core. Let's go back to the beginning, spring 2008 in Oak Creek, Oregon. A town surrounded by dense, ancient pine forests and rolling hills, smelling faintly of cedar and rain. Oak Creek was the kind of town that didn't lock its doors. Neighbors walked into each other's kitchens without knocking. Children rode bikes until streetlights flickered on. A community built on quiet, accumulated trust, taking generations to grow. At its center, the heartbeat of the town, was the high school track and field team. Friday night football and Saturday morning track meets were practically religions. Local businesses painted windows with school colors on race days. Everyone knew everyone else's routines. The brightest star in this perfect little town was about to step directly into a nightmare. At the center of Oak Creek's obsession was 17-year-old Jason Miller. Jason was not just a good kid. He was the golden boy of Oak Creek High, a junior, honor roll student, and undisputed star of the varsity track team. His explosive speed drew college scouts from across the Pacific Northwest. When Jason ran, people literally stopped what they were doing to watch. To those who knew him, Jason was more than medals and records. He was the fiercely protective older brother to Maya and Leo. His father passed away young. His mother, Sarah, worked double shifts as a waitress. Jason stepped into the role of man of the house at a young age. He walked them to elementary school every morning. He cooked macaroni and cheese when his mom worked late. He promised his mother his running would be their ticket out of hardship. He believed a college scholarship would save his family. He carried the weight of the world on his shoulders with an effortless smile. That sense of responsibility, that love, was about to be weaponized against him. Every great athlete has a coach, a mentor who pushes them beyond limits. For Jason Miller, that man was Coach Arthur Vance. Coach Vance was a local legend, head track coach for nearly 20 years. He was demanding, intense, charismatic, pushing athletes to their breaking points. But he was deeply respected by parents and the school board. Why? He produced state champions. To the outside world, Coach Vance was a father figure to Jason. He gave Jason rides home from practice. He bought Jason his expensive custom blue and gold running spikes. He told Sarah Miller her son was a once-in-a-generation talent. He promised to personally ensure Jason got a full ride scholarship. But true crime investigations teach us a very dark lesson. The people who build the most pristine, perfect public images are often the ones with the most terrifying things to hide. Behind closed doors in the privacy of the locker room, the dynamic between Coach Vance and Jason was shifting. Jason was becoming quieter. He was spending more time alone. His best friend, Marcus, noticed that Jason looked exhausted, not just physically but mentally drained. Hold on to that thought, because the truth about what was happening in that locker room is going to completely blow your mind later in this video. The morning of Tuesday, April 14, 2008, began like any other ordinary spring day in the Pacific Northwest. Jason had a strict, unbreakable routine. He was a highly disciplined athlete who truly believed that champions were made in the lonely hours when everyone else was sleeping. Every single morning at 5 a.m., long before the sun came up, Jason would slip out of his warm bed, jog the 2 miles from his neighborhood to the Oak Creek High School track, and put in an hour of grueling sprint drills. On this particular morning, the coastal air was thick with a heavy gray fog. It was the kind of dense freezing fog that swallows sound entirely and limits your visibility to just a few feet in front of your face. Jason kissed his sleeping mother on the forehead, quietly closed the front door so he wouldn't wake his little brother and sister, and jogged off into the mist. He was wearing his standard gray practice sweats and carrying his black athletic duffel bag. He was walking into the fog, and he was walking out of his family's life. But that's not all, because what the assistant coach found on that track just an hour later is going to send a chill straight down your spine. At 6:30 a.m., the assistant track coach arrived at the high school stadium. His job was to unlock the equipment shed and set up the hurdles for the official team morning practice. The stadium was eerily quiet. The thick fog was still hanging low over the wet, artificial turf. As the assistant coach walked out of the tunnel and toward the starting blocks, he saw something incredibly strange. Sitting perfectly parallel on the crisp white line of the first lane was a pair of running shoes. They were Jason's custom blue and gold spikes. These shoes were not thrown or kicked off in a hurry. They were not scuffed up or tossed aside in a struggle. They were meticulously placed. The laces were perfectly tied into neat bows. They were sitting there on the track as if the person wearing them had simply evaporated into the sky. The assistant coach looked around confused. He walked up into the bleachers. Sitting on the second row of the cold aluminum benches was Jason's black athletic bag. The coach unzipped it. Inside, he found Jason's cell phone, his leather wallet, his driver's license, and his house keys. Everything a teenage boy needs to survive in the world was zipped safely inside that bag. But Jason Miller was completely gone. Stick with us because the police are about to be called, and the investigation is going to make one of the biggest, most tragic mistakes in law enforcement history. When Jason did not show up for his first period history class at 8:00 a.m., the school secretary called his mother. Sarah Miller, exhausted from working a late shift at the diner, assumed there had been a simple miscommunication. Maybe Jason had a stomach bug and was resting in the nurse's office. She called Jason's best friend Marcus, who was also on the track team. Marcus told her he hadn't seen Jason at all that morning. Then, the assistant coach mentioned the custom blue and gold shoes left perfectly tied on the track. By 9 a.m., the Oak Creek Police Department was officially dispatched to the high school, and the terrifying, suffocating reality began to set in. If you watch true crime, you know this. A 17-year-old boy, a kid with a bright future, a loving family, and absolutely no history of rebellious behavior or drug use, does not just take off his shoes and walk away into the freezing fog without his phone or his wallet. It doesn't happen. Sarah Miller rushed to the school. She was frantic, holding on to Jason's younger siblings, Maya and Leo, as if someone might snatch them out of her arms too. She kept repeating to the officers that her son would never leave his brother and sister. He walked them to school every day. He would never abandon them. It gets even crazier because the police response to this impossible scene is going to frustrate you beyond belief. The initial police response treated the scene at the track as a highly suspicious disappearance. They taped off the stadium with yellow crime scene tape. They called in specialized tracking dogs from the county sheriff's office. The handler gave the bloodhounds one of Jason's unwashed t-shirts from his gym locker to get his scent. The dogs immediately picked up Jason's scent at the bleachers where his bag was found. They eagerly followed the invisible trail down the bleacher stairs, across the turf, and straight to the starting blocks where the perfectly tied shoes were sitting. And then, the dogs stopped. They whined. They spun in circles. The scent just vanished. It did not lead toward the street. It did not lead toward the dense woods behind the stadium. It didn't lead toward the parking lot. The scent trail simply stopped at the shoes. When the crime scene technicians processed the track and the surrounding turf, what they found, or more accurately, what they completely failed to find, was baffling. There were absolutely no signs of a physical struggle. No tire marks in the nearby mud to indicate a car speeding away. No drops of blood. No dropped clothing. Whoever had taken Jason, or wherever Jason had gone, left zero physical evidence behind. But that's not all. Because when police have no physical evidence, they look to the adults who had the most access to the victim. And in this case, that person was putting on a masterclass in manipulation. When Coach Arthur Vance heard about Jason's disappearance, he rushed back to the stadium. To everyone watching, he appeared completely devastated. He immediately took charge of the civilian volunteer search efforts. He organized massive groups of high school students, teachers, and panicked parents to link arms and comb through the nearby woods and fields. He stood in front of the local news cameras, his eyes red and his voice cracking with heavy emotion. He looked directly into the camera lens, called Jason the son he never had, and pleaded for anyone with information to call the police. The police detectives interviewed Coach Vance extensively. He sat in the precinct interview room and spun a very careful, very deliberate narrative. He told the detectives that Jason had been under a tremendous, almost unbearable amount of pressure. He explained that the crushing expectations of being a star athlete, combined with the heavy burden of being the surrogate father to his younger siblings, was simply too much for a 17-year-old brain to process. Vance was soft-spoken, cooperative, and highly persuasive. He planted a toxic seed in the investigators' minds. Maybe Jason just cracked. Maybe the golden boy couldn't handle the pressure anymore. Maybe he needed to walk away from the crushing weight of his own life. Coming up, you will see how this single lie completely derailed the entire investigation for the next 12 years. Law enforcement officers are human, and when they lack any solid physical leads, they look for psychological explanations. The Oak Creek police, lacking any blood, any witnesses, and any ransom notes, began to lean heavily into Coach Vance's theory. They figured that a teenage boy, overwhelmed by his heavy family responsibilities and sports pressure, had simply suffered a breakdown and hitchhiked out of town to start over. Because of this narrative, the police officially classified Jason Miller as a runaway. If you know anything about missing persons cases, you know that this classification is a death sentence for an investigation. The runaway label meant that the FBI did not step in with full federal force. It meant the national media didn't pick up the story. It meant the resources, the funding, and the manpower began to dry up almost immediately. Within a few weeks, the volunteer search parties dwindled from hundreds of people to just a few dedicated family members. The flyers with Jason's smiling face faded in the relentless Oregon rain. Sarah Miller was screaming into a void. She told anyone who would listen that her son was not a runaway. But without evidence, the system simply moved on. Coach Vance dedicated the next track season to Jason's memory, cementing his public status as a grieving, heroic mentor. It gets even worse because Sarah Miller was about to enter a 12-year purgatory waiting for a ghost to come home. Can you imagine what it feels like to set a place at the dinner table for someone who never walks through the door? For 12 years, Sarah Miller lived in an agonizing, suspended reality. She did what thousands of desperate families of the missing do. She refused to accept silence as an answer. She printed thousands of flyers and stapled them to telephone poles from Oregon all the way to Washington State. She kept the front porch light burning every single night, through winter snowstorms and summer heat waves, just in case her son needed to find his way home in the dark. She kept Jason's bedroom exactly as he had left it on that foggy morning in 2008. His bed remained neatly made. His trophies gathered dust on the shelf. As the years passed, Jason's name became a cautionary tale in Oak Creek. The original detectives on the case retired. The thick, frustrating case file changed hands multiple times, passed from one young investigator to the next. The case entered that terrible holding pattern where it is technically open, but nothing ever advances. Jason's younger siblings, Maya and Leo, grew up. They went to high school, they graduated, and they did it all under the heavy shadow of a brother who had vanished into thin air. But stick with us, because 1,000 miles away, the science of human movement was about to collide with a rainy Sunday afternoon, shattering 12 years of darkness in a single instant. Let's fast forward 12 years. It is now the year 2020. Jason's former best friend, Marcus, is now 29 years old. He has moved away from the ghosts of Oak Creek, settled in Seattle, Washington, and built a successful career as an architect. But Marcus has never, ever forgotten Jason. You do not just forget the boy you grew up with. You don't forget the best friend who vanished and left a permanent hole in your childhood. One rainy Sunday afternoon, Marcus was sitting alone in his Seattle living room. He was casually scrolling through a popular streaming service, looking for something to watch while he sketched out some architectural designs. He clicked on a low-budget independent drama film. It wasn't a famous movie with no A-list actors. It was set in the sprawling, sun-drenched streets of Southern California. Marcus was just playing it for background noise. In a few moments, Marcus is going to look up at his television screen and see something so impossible it will make his blood run cold. About 45 minutes into this random indie film, there is a transitional scene. Main characters are sitting inside a coffee shop, talking through a large glass window. In the background, on the busy California street behind the actors, a man is jogging across a crosswalk. This extra is on screen for 2.4 seconds out of focus. He is wearing a baggy gray hoodie pulled up over his head and dark sunglasses. You absolutely cannot see his face. Marcus dropped his sketching pencil. He felt a sudden, violent chill run down his spine. He grabbed his remote and frantically rewound the film. He played the 2-second clip again and again. He watched that blurry extra jog across the street many times. His heart hammered against his ribs. He was staring at Jason Miller. But how could he possibly know that? The answer lies in a fascinating, science-backed reality about how the human body works. To understand why Marcus was so incredibly certain, we have to talk about the science of biomechanics. Every human being on Earth has a unique biomechanical signature. The exact way your foot strikes the pavement, the specific angle of your pronation, the way your hips sway, the swing of your arms, and the tilt of your shoulders. It is a complex, deeply ingrained muscular pattern. It is as unique to you as a fingerprint, and it is almost entirely subconscious. It is incredibly difficult to consciously change your natural running gait. Marcus and Jason had run thousands of miles together on the track team. They had spent years analyzing each other's physical form to shave seconds off their sprint times. Marcus knew Jason's running gait better than he knew his own face in the mirror. Jason had a highly specific, idiosyncratic stride. He had a slight, almost imperceptible outward kick of his left heel right before his foot struck the ground, combined with an unusually high, stiff arm carriage on his right side. It was a mechanical quirk that Coach Vance had always tried to correct, but Jason's body naturally defaulted to it. The blurry background extra in this indie movie had that exact, undeniable, highly specific left heel kick and right arm carriage. The height was exactly right. The shoulder build was exactly right. But that is not all. Recognizing a gait in a movie is one thing. Proving it to the police is something entirely different. Marcus immediately paused the movie. He pulled out his laptop and frantically looked up the film's production details on IMDb. The movie had been filmed in the summer of 2019, 11 years after Jason vanished. The location listed for that specific coffee shop scene was a neighborhood in Long Beach, California. Marcus knew he sounded crazy. He knew that if he walked into a police precinct and said, "I recognize the way a blurry extra swings his arms in a movie," the cops would politely show him the door. So Marcus bypassed local law enforcement entirely. He pooled his savings and hired a private investigator based in Southern California, a seasoned, grizzled ex-detective named David Thorne. Marcus sent investigator Thorne the time-stamped clip of the movie, along with old VHS high school track footage of Jason running, pointing out the exact biomechanical similarities. Thorne was highly skeptical at first, but when he watched the comparison videos side by side, playing them in slow motion, even he had to admit the resemblance in the movement was uncanny. It was identical. Thorne took the case. Coming up, this private investigator is going to track down a needle in a Hollywood haystack. Investigator Thorne began his hunt by contacting the casting agency that had provided the background extras for the indie film. If you know anything about the film industry, you know that background extras are usually non-union day players. They sign a simple paper voucher, get paid a flat cash rate for the day, and leave. They are notoriously hard to track down, especially a full year after a production wraps. Thorne spent weeks combing through hundreds of daily casting vouchers from the specific day that coffee shop scene was shot. He looked for young men matching Jason's physical description. After weeks of frustrating, mind-numbing dead ends poring over poorly written sign-in sheets, Thorne found a voucher for a man named David Cole. The address listed on the voucher was a small, inexpensive, run-down apartment complex in Long Beach. Thorne drove to the apartment complex. He sat in his unmarked car for 3 full days, running intense, quiet surveillance on the unit. On the morning of the 4th day, the front door opened. A man stepped out. He was older now, his face weathered by time and the harsh California sun. He had a thick beard and was dressed in heavy construction work clothes. But as the man walked down the concrete steps toward a parked pickup truck, Thorne zoomed in with his high-powered telephoto camera lens and snapped a rapid series of high-resolution photographs. It gets even better. Because when those photographs were sent back to Oregon, a single tiny physical trait would shatter 12 years of agony. Thorne securely emailed the high-resolution photographs back to Marcus in Seattle. Marcus took one look at them, immediately picked up his phone, and called Sarah Miller. Marcus flew down to Oak Creek the very next day. He sat in Sarah's living room, opened his laptop, and pulled up the photographs. Sarah looked at the pictures of the bearded man in California. She didn't look at the biomechanical gait. She didn't look at his broad shoulders. She looked directly at a tiny, crescent-shaped silver scar located just above the man's left eyebrow. It was a scar Jason had gotten when he fell off a bicycle at 7 years old. It was the kind of intimate, minute detail that only a mother never ever forgets. Sarah broke down in violent, overwhelming tears. 12 years of agonizing, suffocating silence were finally over. Her son was alive. But the mystery was far from solved. Because finding Jason was only the first half of the story. The real question was, why did he run? Marcus, Sarah, and investigator Thorne flew to Long Beach, California, accompanied by a few sympathetic local law enforcement officers. They did not want to ambush Jason. They wanted to approach him safely and calmly. They waited for him outside the small, dusty construction firm where he was working as a day laborer. When Jason walked out of the building, covered in drywall dust, and saw his mother standing there on the sidewalk, he didn't run away. He didn't try to deny who he was. He simply collapsed to his knees on the hot pavement, buried his face in his calloused hands, and wept like a child. The reunion at the local police precinct an hour later was emotionally shattering. Sarah held her son, touching his face, unable to believe he was solid, warm, and real. But when the California detectives finally sat Jason down in a quiet, sterile interview room to get the truth on the record, the story he told them was darker and more twisted than anyone could have ever anticipated. Coming up, the terrifying truth about the monster hiding in Oak Creek is finally going to be exposed. Jason took a deep, trembling breath and transported the detectives back to the spring of 2008. He explained that beneath the shiny, wholesome veneer of the high school track team, there was a deeply sinister, highly illegal operation running in the shadows. Coach Arthur Vance, the respected, grieving mentor, the man the town worshipped, was a predator. He was heavily involved in an illegal underground sports gambling and performance-enhancing drug ring that stretched across several counties. Coach Vance had identified Jason's immense physical talent early on. He began forcing Jason to take unmarked illegal supplements, threatening to completely ruin his athletic eligibility and destroy his chances of a college scholarship if he refused to comply. When Jason finally discovered the true, terrifying nature of the drugs and the massive illegal betting ring Vance was running, he wanted out. He bravely confronted Vance in the empty locker room a week before he disappeared, telling the coach he was going straight to the principal and the police. That was when Coach Arthur Vance dropped the friendly mentor mask. Vance didn't threaten Jason's life. He knew Jason was physically tough enough to handle a threat. Instead, Vance targeted the one thing in the universe Jason cared about more than himself: his family. Vance calmly told Jason that he had powerful, dangerous, violent associates connected to the criminal gambling ring. He told Jason that if he breathed a single word of the operation to anyone, his little sister Maya and his little brother Leo would pay the ultimate price. Vance made it explicitly, horrifyingly clear that he knew their exact walking routes to elementary school. He knew exactly what time their mother worked her diner shifts, and he could make a fatal accident happen to the kids at any moment. Jason was a 17-year-old boy. He was utterly terrified. He was trapped in a psychological cage built by an adult he had once trusted with his life. He believed that going to the local police, where Vance had friends, status, and influence, would only get his younger siblings murdered. He felt he had only one agonizing, desperate option. He had to remove the leverage. He had to remove himself. But that's not all, because the dominoes were about to fall and the FBI was about to bring the hammer down. Jason explained exactly how he staged his disappearance. He had been secretly hoarding cash from a part-time landscaping job for months. On the foggy morning of April 14th, he ran to the track. He placed his custom shoes perfectly on the starting line to make it look like a mysterious abduction or a sudden tragedy. He wanted to draw maximum police attention to the scene so that Vance wouldn't suspect he had simply run away to plot against him. He left all his identification behind so he couldn't be tracked. He hiked 10 miles through the freezing, dense Oregon woods to a neighboring town, paid cash for a Greyhound bus ticket, and vanished into the massive anonymity of Southern California. For 12 long years, Jason had lived in a constant, exhausting state of hypervigilance. He built a new life as David Cole. He worked brutal under-the-table construction jobs. He never used social media. He never drove a car registered in his name. He lived every single day carrying the crushing, toxic guilt of abandoning his grieving mother. But he did it because he genuinely, truly believed that his silence was the only thing keeping Maya and Leo alive. He thought he was a ghost. He never imagined that walking to get a cup of coffee in the background of a low-budget movie would broadcast his unique, unchangeable running stride to the one person in the world who knew him best. It gets even better, because justice for Arthur, Vance is going to be swift and absolute. Armed with Jason's highly detailed sworn testimony, the FBI and state police launched a massive, covert investigation into Coach Arthur Vance. They didn't alert the local Oak Creek police initially, fearing that Vance's local influence might tip him off. They wiretapped Vance's cell phones. They deeply audited his hidden finances. And they quickly discovered that Jason had been telling the absolute horrifying truth. Vance was still running his illegal operations. He was still exploiting vulnerable young high school athletes. And he was still hiding behind his pristine, beloved public image. In a massive, coordinated tactical raid, federal agents swarmed Oak Creek High School and Vance's private home. They seized computers, hidden financial ledgers, and boxes of illicit performance-enhancing drugs. Coach Arthur Vance was arrested in the middle of a crowded afternoon track practice. He was paraded out of the stadium in heavy steel handcuffs right in front of the very students and parents he was supposed to be mentoring. Coming up, the aftermath of this incredible story will restore your faith in the power of love. The federal trial of Arthur Vance was an absolute media sensation. The tight-knit town of Oak Creek had to reckon with the horrifying, sickening reality that their beloved coach was a manipulative, narcissistic predator, and that the golden boy they had mourned for 12 years had actually been a victim of his intense psychological terror. Jason testified via secure video link from California. His voice was steady, deep, and powerful. He faced down the man who had stolen his youth and shattered his family. The forensic and financial evidence was insurmountable. Arthur Vance was convicted of extortion, child endangerment, distribution of controlled substances, and a massive litany of federal racketeering charges. He was sentenced to 35 years in a maximum security federal prison, ensuring he would never, ever be able to manipulate or threaten another child again. But the real story, the one that truly matters, is what happened after the gavels fell and the news cameras finally packed up and left. Jason returned to Oak Creek. He didn't return as the teenage track star, but as a grown, resilient man who had survived a living nightmare. The reunion with his younger siblings, Maya and Leo, who were now young adults themselves, was a moment of profound, indescribable emotion. They had grown up believing their older brother had either died or selfishly abandoned them. When they learned the incredible truth that Jason had sacrificed his own life, his own identity, and his own happiness entirely to protect them from a predator, the bond between the three siblings was forged into something absolutely unbreakable. Jason slowly began the hard work of reclaiming his real name. He integrated back into society. He went to college, studying sports psychology, determined to become a professional counselor for young athletes who find themselves trapped in abusive, coercive coaching dynamics. Marcus, the brilliant best friend, whose sharp eyes and unwavering loyalty had broken the case wide open, stood proudly beside Jason as the best man at his eventual wedding. This incredible, mind-bending story leaves us with a profound, almost philosophical realization. We move through the modern world assuming that we can disappear, that we can completely reinvent ourselves, that the past can be safely buried under new names and new cities, but the truth is the body remembers. The specific way we move, the way we walk, the way we run, It is a physical signature etched deep into our very bones. Jason Miller changed everything about his life, but he couldn't change the way his foot struck the pavement. More importantly, this story is a beautiful testament to the enduring, unstoppable power of real friendship and a mother's unyielding love. A 12-year-old mystery was not solved by a billion-dollar forensic lab or a massive police manhunt. It was solved because one friend knew another friend so well and cared about him so deeply that he could spot his shadow in the blurred background of a movie screen 1,000 miles away. Thank you so much for reading and watching this deep dive into one of the most extraordinary stories of survival, biomechanics, and friendship we have ever covered. If this story of resilience, the unbreakable bond between siblings, and the incredible science of human movement moved you today, please do me a favor. Hit that like button right now, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment below sharing your thoughts on Jason's incredible sacrifice. Cases like this deserve to be heard, and your engagement is the engine that allows us to keep researching and bringing you these astonishing, true stories week after week. Stay safe out there, always trust your instincts, and we will see you in the next one.